I'm going to go over to the Cintiq first. And we're going to look at a Sargent here. So we're going to want to look at a couple things as we go. And then I'm going to go over to the drawing pad and we'll do most of the work there. But what I want to do is I want to pay attention to a couple things. I'm going to pay attention to how things, if I can get my right layer, how things step back in space. So if I'm looking at a face, in this case a set of eyes, wherever the eyebrow is, which is tracking, not exactly by any means, but roughly the brow ridge, and the eye socket. Here's the eye socket. Here's the eyeball. So that crease of the upper lid oftentimes, not for everybody, but oftentimes we'll see a crease of the upper lid. You can see it here, crease of the upper lid. Right there, and let me make sure I'm not getting any warning signs. So you can see the crease of the upper lid popping there. Whoops, that didn't help. What we want to do at the simplest level, so I just explained just in a couple minutes, or didn't explain it, but just touched on it in a couple minutes, all this anatomy, all this structure, this eye socket, which is bone, the eye, which is actually an exposed part of the brain, I learned fairly recently, and then all the skin and tissue, muscle and fatty deposit, all that kind of stuff, lymphs and some of that, lymph nodes and all sorts of stuff packed in there. That's a ton to work with. And the eyes are incredibly complex because of that. But the simple structure is very simple underneath it all. And the strategy for drawing it can be very simple and can get you quite far. That's what we're going to work on today. So one is we've got a ball in a hole. That's all the eye socket is, with the eyeball in it. And here's the hole, and here's the ball in it. The wedge of the nose comes on top of that, and so on. So the structures are fairly simple, but the nuances, how the subtle structures of the wing meets the bridge, meets the tip, meets the nostril, all that kind of stuff, can be difficult, and even more difficult in the eye. But if we can remember, it's a ball in the hole. So whatever we draw, if it can be suggestive of that ball idea, and it can be suggestive of that whole idea, we're in fairly good shape literally because of that. And even if we miss the ball and miss the hole, we can suggest it simply, dramatic pause, simply by doing what I just had done in the beginning, but hadn't fully explained. Is wherever I draw the eyebrow, the hair of the eyebrow, it might turn into a unibrow, it might be very, very sparse and fade back, but it follows roughly, again, not exactly, but roughly that eye socket, the donut of bone that surrounds the ball on the top, on the bottom, and on the outside. Should probably do it here. Top, bottom, outside. And then the ball nestles in to protect. All we have to do is show the eyebrow quite close, and it could actually overlap and bump into the forehead, but usually it sets back a little bit, especially if we pluck or something. So it lays there kind of like a ribbon shape, even though it has the hair that falls down and crisscrosses as it reaches this transition of the front to the relative side of the forehead. All we have to do, draw that shape. It's some kind of curved triangle, maybe, and simply step back to put in the eyelid and whatever else, maybe the pupil and the iris, whatever else we might want. Now, that's not a lovely eye, but it gets the point across simply because I stepped back the lid from the brow. And if we look at it here, the brow comes forward to protect the eye. Look how far back we go to get to the lid, and then how far back inside the lid we get to the pupil and iris. This is exaggerated. It's doubled up because you don't have lashes that shade. Sculptors of doing portraits typically will make that thickness of the lid hyper thick. So it really sets out. So in the environment that the sculpture is placed in, it shades beautifully the top of the eyeball, including the dark pupil and iris there. So on a sculpture, this goes way back in here oftentimes. And notice I did not show the eyeball at all. I screwed that up or stylized that out like a Doonesbury cartoon. Those of you who are familiar with that American cartoon. I did all straight lines to describe curved objects, which is also a bad design choice probably. But I did the step back. Notice what I did. I moved back a little bit from the forehead contour, although I wouldn't necessarily have to, but that's usually the case. Then I stepped back again to draw the upper lid and maybe even the crease of the upper lid, which would be roughly, not exactly, but roughly the bone. And with age, it sags. With different races, sometimes that'll change. That crease will lower or disappear. It can vary from person to person, age and age, race to race, and so on. But it's also stepping back. Let's do this. Stepping back from the brow. Stepping back from the forehead. That one's the least important. Stepping back to the lid. And stepping back to the eyeball. The cornea is a natural contact lens. It might push forward some, but it's kind of invisible. It's a little dome of clear material. But what we usually see is not the cornea, but we see the pupil and iris there. Whoops, wrong side. Okay, so we're using a step back strategy. The other thing we'll want to do is whether we're drawing the lids to describe here's that step back. However we're describing the lids, here I'm drawing the rounded lid over the rounded eyeball. We want to show the thickness of the upper lid. We can do that in a couple ways. I'll show you that on the board. And we want to show the thickness of the lower lid. And then the dark pupil and iris will be in there. The lashes will help in some ways and hinder in others. But again, we're getting that stepping back, but also we're getting thicknesses. When we step back, we're stepping along back along the thickness of the lid to get to the ball. And then we step back out off the ball to the thickness of the lid again. And then we might drop down, we might fade back, or we might step forward again to the thickness of the bone structure. Just like we'll step forward again on top, or to begin with, for the bone structure that's coming forward. Bone structure is way forward. Look how far the lid is back from the bone structure, which fades completely or almost at the forehead meeting the nose, and then steps back from forehead bone to lid, lid covering to eyeball, eyeball then bumping back out to lower lid, bumping back out to cheek oftentimes. So notice how beautifully nestled in it is, how beautifully nestled it is from the bottom and the top to hide and protect that lovely eye. Okay, so that's our strategy. We're going to want to look for the thicknesses that will actually, and again, I'll show you this, thicknesses that will actually show themselves in catching light and catching shadow, going down and stepping back in and out, protective bone, precious eye, and so on. So it's quite a strategy. So, but if we can understand that stepping, and if we apply values on it, oh good, we're getting some links there. Thanks, Mike. Then we don't have to know as much of the anatomy. Anatomy is massively complicated, and it's medical, it's science, so there's no aesthetics there. So you're still not a great artist, even if you have a great deal of information about the biology of what you're drawing. We need some of that. We can actually get away with none of it, but it's super helpful to have some of it and even a lot of it. I'll take all I can get, but I won't take it at the expense of the aesthetics. If we can think of a basic structure of process to get the general strategy of how the biology designed a protective environment for the eye, then we don't need to know all the nuances of the biological strategy there. So it's helpful. So I always start with aesthetics first, structure. The body is architecture first. Stepping back and forth, stepping in and out, turning down away from the bottom of the box catches shadow, the top of the box or the lid catches light. That's what I'll focus on first and foremost. And then I'll layer in the physics, the biology, laws of light, atmospheric perspective. So I said last time linear perspective in one of the talks, and somebody nicely corrected me. Thank you for that. And anatomy, écorché, all that good stuff. So I'm always interested in every bit of information I can get, but I prioritize it. Where am I going to spend most of my time? And where am I going to spend not very much of my time? Where can I afford to skimp a little bit? And where should I be extravagant in my investment? Okay, so we are here. I've got my little phone here, so Ashwini or Mike or somebody can tell me when I'm doing something wrong, but so far so good. And I tried to arrange it so I could get some reference here. I haven't been able to do that yet. So I've got my computer off screen. Most of this I'll make up. But we'll just go from here. So let's look at that strategy. And let me do one thing real quick. I'm going to come back here. I lied. Let's come back to that for just a second. I'll show you the reference really quickly. That I'm using. I'm not sure how much I'll get to, but we'll see here. Okay, so there's that Sargent. And you can see the shading strategy here. The underside of that upper lid, and you can see the thickness here, is in shadow and is just grouped in with those sparse lashes. The top side is catching light and then drops down again into shaded shadow. Where's my other guys here? Give me a second to fumble. I have to do some fumbling every single lesson, or you wouldn't recognize it as one of my classes. Okay, and you folks who have been with me for a while will have recognized me using these. I like to use the same reference over and over, talking about different ideas so we can see one little corner of life, one head of one particular model on one particular position from different ideas, value, box logic, anatomy, gesture, structure, all that kind of stuff. So let me get the other one here. This is lesser resolution. That's okay. So you can see in both of these, this is kind of pixelated, but you can see in both of these the stepping back. So I'm going to use all three of these, give or take time. I may not get to the sergeant. I may save that for next week, the front view. But we're going to look at these and see the strategy, and then we'll play with a little bit of lighting on it. And we can see how simple we can make it and how relatively realistic we can make it without all the trouble that we have to go through. So let me shift back to my page. There we go. So if we look at Roberto here, so this is going to be the forehead contour, the silhouette of the whole head. I'm going to start with, and I'll show you, this won't look great, but you can see, oh, it looks pretty good actually. So that's what I'm working from. And as oftentimes the case, not always, my eyebrows don't do this. Mine are a little bit more a clown eyebrow. They just kind of curve over, but usually an eyebrow will have a little hitch as it goes from kind of the front corner plane into the side temple area. And Roberto has a beautiful transition there, a real strong transition we can work from. So when I'm drawing, I'm trying to make it as simple as I can, but as characteristic. So if I were to break this into kind of a boxy version rather than just kind of a fluid version of it, I want each line to fit with the next, but also have its own character. So notice this is straight, this is bulging, this swings up into a bit of an S curve and then a lazy curve over, and then this all tightens up and kind of fades out. And I could do that all sorts of different ways. I could hatch in, I could paint in a value for it, as Sargent has done, and most people do when they paint or draw eyebrows. So usually they don't do all the hairs, just like on the head. And then I'm going to use that step back logic. I'm going to move back. It doesn't step back a ton, but it does step back. He's got a really subtle crease of the upper lid. It's not big and strong the way I drew it. And some won't have it at all. But notice what's happening is it's the lid, and let me draw a little bit of it. I'm going to make it simple. The lid is not doing this, and then the eyeball would be in here, which is the way I drew it originally on the Cintiq. It's leaning back, and it's not really curving back. It's a pretty straight line, but it's leaning back because it's going over the surface. The thick lid is going over the surface of that eyeball underneath. Now, if we do that too much, play that lid back too much, it can look kind of bug-eyed. The eyeball is in here, and then the lids are in here. And of course, I'm overdoing this. The thickness is in here. And it can look a little bulging. So oftentimes you'll see this not go straight, not lean back a lot. Sometimes it'll kind of hang off the bone structure and drop down. In this case, so it doesn't. It follows our plan nicely. And I could choose to curve that, but I wouldn't have to, just so lean's enough. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to step back to get to the pupil and iris, to get to the actual eyeball. And it's painted like a target. And it's kind of impossible in a way to step back too far. I'd rather step back too far than too little. You can see the bulge, the iris is actually or the cornea, the natural contact lens, is actually catching the reflection of the iris, so it's actually bulging out more than it really would on the surface, which is fine. It's in there, but it's stepped back not as much as I did it. Not as much as I could have done it, like our beautiful sculpture, Donatello there. But stepping back significantly so I don't miss it. And I'm thinking of that step back without the lids. I don't want to without the eyelashes. I don't want to sweep forward with those beautiful eyelashes on that young model or camel lashes or something, and then bring the eyeball well back from the lashes because it might line up close to the lid itself. We don't want that. We want it back from the lid, no matter what the lashes do. If I just do that, I do a lot. And then if I can curve these lines, curve or S-curve these lines one way or the other, curve, get underneath this so you can see it, curve or S-curve them. Now it's going to feel like it's going over that lovely curved ball one way or another. And then oftentimes you'll see that lower lid come straight down because it's hanging off the ball, falling onto the cheek like a curtain hanging down and catching the corner of the couch. So it drops down, and then it might bump forward as it did in the Donatello, or it might swing back. And that's what it's doing here. And I can lay in just a couple lines, and they're pretty crude, aren't they? So don't worry about the beautiful subtlety of things. Just get the idea down and then do it again, do it a little bit better. Then do it again, do it a little bit better. Then do it again and add a little nuance, an extra bit of detail, and so on. So I'll usually draw more than one line. It's good practice. I'm getting to know that terrain. And it's suggestive of either a thickness or a shading. It's grouping together the shade. And even if I screw it up, like now I've made dark the thickness of the upper lid that should be catching light there. That's okay. This looks like it's a actor who's done eyeliner to highlight the eyes, to replace the missing lashes or whatever, to make him look mysterious or her more exotic or whatever. So we're just doing that strategy. And I'm going to do that over and over again until I can lay it in pretty well. And what I can do is go real light. I'm going to use a stump, which is a paper pencil. I'm going to take alpha color, which is nice thick charcoal sticks. They're usually about 3 inches long, ½ inch square. And that's going to be my pigment. And I can lay this in lightly. I'll draw whatever size is comfortable. This is Eve now, another beautiful young model who does these wonderful poses. Give or take the position. This is slightly less than a full profile, slightly turned towards us. So we're getting a little bit of the other lash here. This is the other brow here. This is pulling this way. And I'm going to use my step back. Now she has much deeper eye socket, much stronger crease of the upper lid than Roberto had. And again, I'm going to try and be a good designer. Each line, while making a greater shape, is going to have its own particular character for the most part. And the curvature of the brow here, I'll even want that to be different than the curvature of the crease of that orbicular area here. Notice it opens up a little bit here. Maybe I'll play up that openness. And then I'm using that same step back strategy. Now, in this case, Eve's eye, and this is a bad resolution, I apologize, but Eve's eyelid is very curved. It's catching a little bit of light there, but quite curved going over that curvature of the eyeball. So it can vary a lot. Is it dropping straight down, hanging off that scaffold? Is it straight line or is it beautifully curved, tracking? And if it's laying back or beautifully curved, tracking the contour of the ball itself, I probably won't do that on the bottom because I don't want it to look bug-eyed. But I'm going to go back now, stepping back. Here is the hair of the eyebrow. Here is the lid. It'll be a little curved as well, maybe, but again, different than these two. These come down and meet as this eye socket moves. This eye socket wraps around and protects. Yeah, you can see that nicely. Protects the eyeball that's stuck inside. This is a little small, but stuck inside there, like so. So the crease of the upper lid is going to be just padding just below that on a young model that has that deep crease structured into his or her eye. So I'll go a little slower, a little lighter if I'm trying to be more nuanced or be more careful, careful in registering my discoveries or my understanding, new or practiced. So stepping back again then for the pupil and the iris. And the pupil and the iris are perfect circles on a bullseye of the eyeball. They're just painted on that sphere. So when we start moving into a 3/4 view, we're just getting a perfect ellipse of the pupil and the iris. And then we'll get the cornea over the top that may or may not show up. Okay, so we've worked our way back in. Now we're going to work our way back out. Like so. And then if we're confident at some point we can push it darker. If we're going to take it any farther, I'll push it darker so you can see. I can just track those lines not even do tone. And then I'll do a little bit of a scoop action for the eyelashes. I can make them what I see or thicker. I'll almost always group those as a solid shape, kind of little triangular shape that's not so different sometimes than some of the design elements I'm using for the eyebrow, but it can be very different. And then the lower lid will be catching some either makeup and or some pretty meager lashes, but we'll get a little shading. And then the front edge, I'll push it a little darker. The front edge there oftentimes gets darker. If you take that too far down, it's going to look like a tired, baggy eyes, of course. We don't want too much of that. But if we keep it tight to the lid there, the beginning of the lid, and show a little bit of the opening there, we're showing a little bit of the thickness there. Stepping out, stepping forward, like so. This actually rolls this way. So we get that step, stepping back, stepping out. In that sense, I'm thinking of a step pyramid, a ziggurat. You can step back or out. In this case, the eyebrow, the upper crease of the upper lid, the thickness of the lid, the eyeball, thickness of the lower lid, and then if the cheek bulges out, we're getting that eye structure. And then it's also facing down. We'll look at that more another time. Facing down to get darker. Facing down to get darker. Shading what's below it. Maybe shading what's below it. And then stepping out to get lighter. Stepping out to get lighter. Then it might tuck back through. Darken it again as it tucks under. So we get this natural stair stepping. And we'll get these chunks of shadow hiding some of the lid, oftentimes shading the hollow, which is that eye socket idea. This is the donut. Eyeball setting in that zygomatic arch going back to the ear, wrapping around and fading into the inside of the top brow, inside of the transition of the wedge of the nose into the cheeks, stepping back. So anything that's underneath the beginning of that eyebrow is tucking under, and it gets shaded first. This will get a little shady, and then we'll cast over the lid. And then the lid, thickness of the lid that we can see, or if we can't, the eyelashes that are naturally dark almost always get shaded. This gets opened up, catching light. This tucks back under and around that ball, gets a little darker, not usually full shadow, but a little darker there. So we get this natural stepping of dark, light, dark, light. This can get a little darker gradation too. That can get shaded in darkness. And then light, dark, and so on. So we want to capture that shading effect. This is what I'd done last time when you guys couldn't see me. There's just a natural transition of light to dark to light to dark. Light to dark to light to dark, reversing back. That ziggurat, going back in, catching shadow, catching light, catching shadow, catching light, and then back out, catching light, maybe catching shadow, or at least darker halftone, catching light, catching darker halftone, maybe shadow. So we get that process. You get that step logic and you apply a value range to those steps, the things that step back in and lose light, things that step out or turn up and catch light. And you can stylize that quite simply in all sorts of areas. These are front three-quarter views. And even if you kind of screw it up, look at the straight line here. Look at the straight line here that may not have been there. We screw that up, but we know that we're tucking under in the top inside of that eye socket. All of this, top inside of that eye socket. It doesn't matter if we screw up the anatomy. We've got the major structure and the major value pattern of it. And not even a good drawing necessarily of any particular part, but great positioning of those parts. If you get the positions and the proportions, but especially the positions right, and if you screw up in the right way, make that lid too thick, so step back that eyeball farther, make that lid too deep, so have it step back from the brow and the upper bony hollow of the socket too far, make the shadows too dark, the lights too light. Those are good screw-ups, and then things are more forgiving. Here you can see that bug-eyed effect that doesn't usually flatter too much. It's a mistake people make. Sometimes you'll see people with that, but usually if you're drawing some idealized version, you'll want to not curve it back so much, or if you curve one back strongly, as I did here, you'll back off the curvature on the next go around, as I did down here. Okay, so let's see on time, that's about it.